This is the Gauntlet Podcast, episode number 4, Old Yellers. My name is Jason.
My name is Steve.
My name is Dan.
Cool. So why don't we jump right into games we have played since the last time we recorded. Steve, you're joining us anew from the holidays, so do you want to get started?
So probably the first thing I played is what you guys talked about last week was A Taste for Murder. And you guys talked about that already. So moving on.
Anything you want to add? I mean, you heard our part of it. Did you have any different thoughts?
Oh, that room table.
It's really good.
It's so great. I could just sit there all day and roll rooms up and amuse myself and be fine with it. I'm not as skeptical as you about being able to run it seriously as long as you guys go on with an agreement.
Right.
Yeah. Keep the tone light, and then if you notice things getting a little too goofy, just point it out.
Well, yeah, and we didn't have that conversation.
Yeah.
Like, we could have had that conversation and fixed that up, but
I was totally happy with the results we got.
Yeah, it was
me
good.
too.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was great fun. Yeah, it was terrific.
Oh, and it was fun, A, getting murdered, and B, playing the inspector.
Oh, I'd like to, special commendation to you for being the inspector. I love the way you did the
final reveal
the little
scene.
final reveal thing, where you, like, went around to the entire table and said, and, like, basically made the case for why they could have done it, but then said, but it wasn't you. Right. And then you moved to the next person, right? That was very, very, like, genre appropriate. It was good. I liked it. Anything else?
So I played a game called, I'm glad I typed this out, Krosmaster Arena. That's K-R-O-S, Master, all one word. Arena.
I have seen that in stores. I don't know anything about it, though.
I've played it, and I know just a little bit more than you.
Okay.
It was pitched to me as basically a war game, and it's very anime. Like, the characters they're really cool little pre-painted, colorful, lovely little figures, but they're, trying to kill each other. I have no idea why. I don't know anything about the fluff or anything. And I have such a limited war game history that honestly it just reminded me of 4th Ed D&D combat, which is not a bad thing. I enjoy that sort of thing just in a board game context.
I've heard 4th Ed is really great if that's what you're into. I've never played it, but I've heard that if you were into tactical board game style, combat, it's pretty awesome.
I played it for years and was happy with what it did. Yeah,
me too, actually. Yeah. Anyway, that's a different topic. But this one, it's played on a grid, sort of like D&D 4th, and I think the grid is the same every time. The one little weird bit about it is that, moving perpendicular to where you are, that costs you 1 move. But moving diagonally, like in D&D, that they just consider that 1 movement point. But here it's 2, so the things that are diagonal from you, but that seem close, are very far away, and it just sort of plays with my head.
Yeah.
But it's, you have characters, your characters have little cards that give you all their powers. There's nothing weird or fiddly to keep track of, really. And it's fairly simple, and it was pretty fun.
Cool. Awesome. Dan, do you want to go into your list?
Sure. So the first game I played was Forbidden Desert, which, if you're familiar with Forbidden Island,
right,
it's by the same designer. If you're not familiar with Forbidden Island, if you're familiar with Pandemic.
Right, it's Matt Laycock, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So Forbidden Island maps really closely to Pandemic. You basically don't even have to read the rules.
The rules
of Forbidden
they're
Island.
almost Mad-libbed in a way.
Yeah,
like,
they really kind
of
are.
Switch out certain words and the
right.
rules for Forbidden Island, and it'd be the rules for Pandemic, practically.
More or less, yeah. But the one thing that Forbidden Island kind of did, though, was that parts of the board would sync, and so then, like, it would screw up your paths through the board. Yeah. And so that was kind of the way that it diverged a little bit from Pandemic. Also, it was like 50 times faster to set up. Right, so that was... I have both those games, but I ended up playing Forbidden Island a lot more because, because I just play with my wife. And
that
so
makes sense. Yeah. I can't imagine Pandemic with 2 players. That would be a bit.
It's fine.
Is it? Oh,
but
okay.
you get the same experience from Forbidden Island, and it's so much faster.
I could totally see that. Yeah, for sure.
And so
it comes in that nice little tin.
It does, yeah. Like, all of the components are really nice. Forbidden Desert has taken the same sort of screws up your pathing mechanic and turned it up, because now all of the tiles move around and shift throughout the game. So, like, long-term planning is way harder in that game than even in Pandemic or something. Because
do they shift predictably?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, so you're drawing cards. So instead of, like, drawing cards to see what city's outbreaking or which tiles are sinking, you're drawing cards that are, like, showing which direction tiles are shifting in.
Okay, yeah.
And so it's basically impossible to predict.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, so I don't know. It was a good time.
Is it, so I have kind of a bias towards Forbidden Desert, knowing nothing about it except its, pedigree or whatever, because I've always perceived Forbidden Island as like a kid's version of cooperative style games like Pandemic. Like, I like Forbidden Island, but I much prefer Pandemic. I just feel like it's a deeper game. Is Forbidden Desert more one or the other?
So bear in mind, I've only played one game of Forbidden Desert, but it seems like it's probably got less room for like in-depth strategies, right? You're not planning things out 5 turns in advance because you have no idea of predicting what the board's going to look like 5 turns from now. Yeah. So it's a lot more just look at the board and figure out what you want to do now. So there's not like,
tactical
there's not the
versus strategic.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. There's not the really like looking far ahead aspect of it.
All right, cool. Let me see if I have anything on my list that you didn't cover because we played a lot of our games together this week.
I don't think you've ever mentioned this Pathfinder Adventure card game before.
I have not mentioned this Pathfinder Adventure card game. Let me tell you about it. It is no good. It is fun. It is not as much fun as it used to be though. I am starting to reach this point.
Wearing on you?
Yeah, I'm reached this point in my Pathfinder card game arc where it is no longer delivering. So here's the thing. Pathfinder Adventure card game is a great example of why mechanics matter, right? A game can be super fun and have shitty mechanics, right? We've said that 100 times. It can be objectively bad, it can be mechanically bad, but still fun. But here's the thing. Only the ones with good mechanics hang in for the long haul, right? Because once you've had fun with with the fluff or with the art, or once you've had fun with like the sort of like lizard brain role-playing game things, like, ooh, I get level advancement, I get loot. Once you get past all that stuff, that can only provide so much entertainment. And at a certain point, if the rules aren't good, if you can't fall back on like, wow, this is a really mechanically sound game. I can kind of master it a little bit. I can make it work for me. If the game doesn't have that, it's going to lose its appeal pretty fast. And so it is a great argument for why you need good, solid mechanics, not just easy fun. So, Pathfinder card game. I'm getting tired of it. I think we're probably going to stop soon, because I'm getting over it. Grimworld was good. Played Grimworld, which is, I've talked about that a couple times. Real fast thing about Grimworld. I don't want to talk about it much, but, so we have 6 players in this game of Grimworld. 4 of them died. 4 of the 6 players died last session. That was pretty cool. The playbooks have these things called death moves, and we discovered that when one of them goes off, it often causes all of them to go off. And so you end up with this like chain reaction of like bad shit happening. But it was really fun. Like the players, even though the characters were dying in horrific ways, they were still having a really good time with it. Everybody's having a good time watching their characters go out in a blaze of glory, which I guess is the point of the death moves, right?
Right.
It's a bummer that we lost 4 of the 6 characters, but whatever. Everyone's excited to try a new one. So that's a thing, I guess. And then finally, the game I really want to talk about is Cheat Your Own Adventure. Dan and I played this on Wednesday.
Right.
We were supposed to play Monster Hearts, but that didn't happen. So we played Cheat Your Own Adventure. It was about 7 of us. Do you want to set it up a little bit for the listeners?
Sure. So the whole idea behind Cheat Your Own Adventure is you're basically telling the story from an old Choose Your Own Adventure book. And so you stay in that sort of narrative framework where you're always narrating in the second person. So it's like whoever's the current narrator is reading the book out loud. Whenever they get to a point in the story where it would be a decision point in one of the Choose Your Own Adventure books where it's if you attack the monster, turn to page 25. If you run from the monster, turn to page 53.
Right.
So whenever you get to a point like that, the narrator sets up what's happening, and then everyone else around the table takes turns giving an option.
Right. For example, if you choose to grab the golden idol, turn to page 42. But if you choose to do this other thing instead, turn to page 65.
You guys were playing with 7 people, so there would be 6 options in this game?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's great. It's so good. Yeah.
And it sounds like that would be overwhelming, but it really wasn't. It all happens very quick. Everybody just fires off an option, and the only thing that the narrator has to do is basically like choose which of the options they like the best. And so then they will pass the die off to that player who came up with the option they like the best. That player will roll and try and hit a target number, which is increasing throughout the game. If they hit the target number, then it was a safe choice, and you go on and they continue narrating the story.
They get to be the narrator now. Right.
Whoever came up with that option becomes the new narrator. They narrate the story until the next decision point, as if like you had chosen well by picking their thing.
Right. Yeah.
If they fail to reach the target number with their die roll, then
cheat.
It's a bad path, right? So that's one of the you tried to stab this guy and he killed you,
and
now
book's got
you're
a nice little picture of your death.
Right, yeah. You got like the skull and crossbones or whatever, the end in big letters. But then that's when the previous narrator can cheat, and it's like they've had their finger stuck in the book, at the decision point, so then they just like flip back and choose a different path. And then that one is always safe. And so then that person takes over narration.
I love that because that's how you read those books.
Yeah. It's so cool. Yeah. It is so good. We play a lot of games, and I don't get completely mind blown or by a game very often. But man, Cheat Your Own Adventure was just, it was hitting everything for me. It was so great. We played it 3 times over the course of the evening, in about a 2.5 hour, 3 hour period of time. We played it 3 times. Probably could have played it even more, honestly. They're pretty fast games. They last about 30 to 40 minutes each, right? The first 2 times we played were
very standard
kind of adventure things. And they were a lot of fun. Like, it was
the type of stories that you would read in a Choose Your Own Adventure.
Something you forgot to mention is to set up the story. The way you do it is you roll on this table. And so that the first part that you roll is like the swamp, and then you roll of doom, right? Or the crypt of despair, right? Like so using that, like using the title of your book, you then like use that to sort of inspire the story you tell. And our first 2 were pretty straight down the line, like adventure type stories, right? They got a little gonzo, a little funny because of the group of people we had, but, and a little dirty on occasion, but they were a lot of fun, and we were laughing, we were having a great time with it, and it was just like, it was so good. But then we had this really awesome idea. So I'd heard about it on this podcast called The Twitching Curtain, and it had come up on their podcast. So that's how I knew about it. But they had talked about how they used the game to tell like smaller and emotional stories. And so we decided at the end of the night, we're like, well, do we want to do it again? And we're like, well, yeah, let's try to do it in this mode, like where we tell this like different sort of story. And so I had what I considered to be I made a very deft move and asked Dan to set it up because I knew that Dan would set it up right. And he set it up to be, the adventure it started with,
so the name of it was The Crypt of Doom.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So already we're just perfect tone for our serious book. Right?
Yeah, The Crypt of Doom. Yeah, indeed. Dan set it up so that he was the first narrator. He set it up so that the story opened with, it was a woman and a man, and the man was clearly dying. They were having a conversation, about like, it was like, tell me your favorite memory of me or something like that. Right. Yeah. And so that was the option that everyone had to present. Like, what was this guy's favorite memory of his wife? Right. If it was this, turn to this. It was this, turn to this. And it was good. It was so good. Some people chose things that were like kind of funny. Other people came up with things that were really like very touching and poignant. It was great. I mean, and the story we told, it kept going down this path, right? We were watching this guy. His adventure, so to speak, was this man going through his day-to-day life, making the decisions that you have to make when you're dying. And so he had an estranged son that he hadn't told yet. There was an issue with that. The trips to the doctor, really, really heavy stuff. And it was, what'd you think, Dan? I just thought it was so great.
I thought it was really impressive that everybody at the table was like completely zeroed in on
they
this
were
tone.
into it. Yeah, they were totally into it.
And one of the things that I thought was great about the game was you kind of get a range of options for tone as well. And so the narrator kind of has their choice of how, like, do I want to go darker or do I want to have like a touching moment here or a funny moment here?
Right.
And so I thought that, like, kind of as a group, we did a really good job of sort of alternating and like going between all of the different emotional states.
Yeah, it was great. There was always a general tension between like, is this guy going to handle his circumstances in a way that is like life affirming, or is he going to handle it in a way in which he's embittered about it, right?
Right. There's almost always an option. Someone almost always presented an option that was kind of lashing out at the world.
Right. Yeah. And so it was so good. And by the end, I mean, there were a couple people whose eyes were misty. I mean, because it was a pretty intense experience. At some point, we just had a little break where we went to go get drinks and stuff, and we're playing this in the middle of a noisy restaurant, and it still came off right. But we had to like have this moment where and it was like a little like pressure valve, you know, like being released. It was like, oh man, like this is really hard. It was just a really touching experience. And, you know, in this game, it's ostensibly about like adventures, right? But it was neat. I love Cheat Your Own Adventure. Listeners, it's free. Go look it up. You should definitely give it a shot. It takes, you know, it's very fast playing. Any number of players. I think you could have a pretty big number and it would be great, or even a smaller number. Scales very well. Just terrific stuff.
So in the normal like adventure game, when you don't hit the target number,
you describe how he dies.
Right.
Okay.
You describe how the adventurer dies. Like, oh, an alligator ate you or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in our serious game, those were like what you'd have as the bad endings, right? Like he died angry or he died like
unfulfilled
in some way.
And we had a couple times, and that was a neat thing is because as it goes on and on, your chances of failing the roll are increased dramatically, right?
Okay.
And so you get to see the bad option, right? And so that was very poignant too because we got to narrate the bad option, even though we get to cheat and go back to a better ending. You know?
And then as the narrator, when you're looking at these options, there's kind of this tension between like, there's an option that I really want, but if I pick it first, the target number's getting pretty high.
Right.
And so it might actually lead to a really bad ending. And so like, then there's this sort of gamesmanship where it's like, well, maybe I should just pick the one that I think is the worst for where I want the story to go, because then that would, prove me right in a sense, like, they would be likely to miss that. And then we could see how like choosing this bad option leads to a bad end, and then cheat and go back and then pick the one I really want when it's safe.
When you cheat, it gets easier?
When you cheat, the next option is always a success.
It always succeeds. Yeah, so the game is steadily progressing towards completion, right?
Gotcha.
Because every round, there's a successful one right after. If you had a bad one, the next one is always successful.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, that would be annoying if it was failure.
Well, yeah, and so they mentioned that in the rules. They said that when they were playtesting it, that they had it to where you didn't do that. You didn't automatically move up to the next point in the progression. But they found that the games went on forever.
Yeah. Because I mean, the last target number is 12. You're rolling 2d6.
Right, yeah. So it was great. I love Choose Your Own Adventure. So why don't we take a break and we'll go to the next segment?
Sounds good.
So our next section is called Giving Me Life. This is our section where we cover things that are not board games and role-playing games, or not tabletop games, I should say. Dan, what is giving you life this week?
So this week, what's been giving me life is the AGDQ, which is an event put on by a group of gamers who all do speed runs, basically. So like getting a video game and running it from like start to finish in the shortest time possible. Apparently this is a huge thing.
What does AGDQ stand for?
It is Awesome Games Done Quick.
Okay.
It's a charity thing they do. I think they raised like $1.5 million or something. It's just their like get together, do something good for charity, and hang out and be amazing at video games thing. But
so this is done live?
It is, yeah. They streamed the entire thing on Twitch.
Right.
So you could just log on and just watch them sitting down in front of couches and like playing these games.
You can watch it later on YouTube and stuff too.
Right, yeah, which is what I did. I didn't actually watch most of it live. There were a couple things that just completely blew my mind. I think the only one that I really want to talk about is Tetris.
Okay.
Because I did not really think that watching people play Tetris would be an exciting highlight of my week. But oh my God, it was an exciting highlight of my week.
Yeah.
Because these people have mastered Tetris on a whole nother level. Because, I played Tetris on my Game Boy when I was a kid, but man, so apparently they've been making newer and harder versions of Tetris all these years since I quit playing Tetris.
Since the Game Boy one, right? Yeah.
Right. Because people have gotten so good that they're just bored by regular Tetris. And so they went through kind of an exhibition of, so this is Tetris Grandmaster Edition. And then people got so good at that they made Tetris Grandmaster Edition 2, and then people mastered that to the point where they were like, well, we better make it harder, and made like Tetris Grandmaster Edition 3. So one of the dudes who was playing this, he goes through on, I think it was Tetris Grandmaster 3, and to get like the highest rank, they're tracking all these statistics as you're playing. So every time a piece drops, it gets faster. You're not getting a certain number of lines before it speeds up. Every time a piece drops, it gets faster.
Okay.
They're watching your split time. So like, I want to say every 200 pieces, you have to have made a Tetris, and you have to be getting faster every time.
Okay.
Because if you're ever like more than 2 seconds slower on a later split than you were on the split before, then it assumes that you're screwing up.
Wow.
And it's like, nope.
Gosh, that's crazy.
So like in the beginning, he starts off and he's playing, and it's really impressive. And he's like, yeah, I'd be going faster here, but I want to give myself some buffer room for later. So that was already blowing my mind. He gets through to the end, and while the credit scroll is happening, he starts playing. But when he puts the pieces down, they disappear.
So it's invisible. Right.
All the pieces turn invisible when they hit the ground.
Oh, no, screw that.
Yeah, ridiculous. But he's still like nailing it.
Wow.
With just invisible pieces like Neo in the Matrix shit. I was like,
that's awesome.
I don't understand. Yeah. I'd love to like look inside that dude's brain or something while he's doing that, because that is amazing. So that was it. I watched people play Tetris, and it blew my mind.
Cool. Yeah, I watched a little bit of that AGDQ stuff too. It was pretty awesome. Like just some of the ones I saw, and I was like, it just seems like it seems superhuman almost. It's crazy.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's cool. Steve, what's giving you life right now?
So what is giving me life this week and a half or so is Crusader Kings 2.
What is that?
It's a PC game.
Okay.
It's basically a dynastic simulator type of thing.
Okay.
So you're not just playing one character, you're playing, like, you'll start off playing a leader of some sort. It'll be, depending on who you go with. And there are hundreds at least of people to choose from in any given start time. So you're playing like a king. And then when your king eventually dies, when the game gets far enough that your guy dies of old age or gets assassinated or killed in war or whatever, then it'll go to his heir, typically. And it gets complicated from that, but you're basically playing a succession of rulers through their ups and downs. And I first found out about the game through a Kotaku article, I think, talking about how Crusader Kings 2 plus a free mod turns it into the perfect Song of Ice and Fire / Game of Thrones game.
Huh.
Nice.
And that's what brought it to my attention. So it was on my, Steam wish list for a while. And then what sold me on it is I went through and read the Steam user reviews.
Right.
Which fall into one of three categories. First is standard review. Here's what I like. Here's what I didn't. Whatever. Second category is people talking about their experiences in the game. Like, destroyed all my enemies, forced my uncle to marry my daughter, murdered by my infant son. 10 out of 10. And then the third category is people that are like, this game's okay. Didn't really play it much. Then you look at the top of their review, it's like they've logged 2,763 hours. And so there's a big learning curve at the start.
Okay.
Because you'll be playing for 10 hours without really knowing
what's going on,
quite what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I tried to play that game, and I got as far as sitting through menus trying to figure out who I wanted to try to marry all of the people in my court to.
Yeah.
And at some point it was just like, I don't even know anymore. What am I doing? What am I doing with my life? So I could not find the fun. I think that's another case where you have to chase it down and beat the fun out of it.
The easy answer is that some things are required in that game, some things aren't. That isn't.
Oh, that would have been good to know.
Yeah.
But they don't really signpost any of that.
Yeah. Your courtiers and whatever will come to you and be like, boy, I sure wish I was married, and then toe the ground awkwardly. And,
right.
And you can be like, no, me too, that'd be great, whatever. And you don't have to pay any attention to them because they'll get married themselves typically. But it's just this great sprawling game, and you can assassinate or talk your way into alliances or into territory. It really absorbed me, even though I haven't touched the mod yet that turns it into Game of Thrones where you're the Lannisters.
The thing that originally drew you in. Yeah. Cool. Well, the thing that's giving me life this week, I'm going to break our video game streak from the past 2 weeks and say something non-video game related. So, and I'm going to go back to the Gauntlet and board game and role-playing game stuff. No, the thing that's giving me life this week. So I have created this new event for the Gauntlet. It's starting in February. It is called Mandatory Fun Club. And the idea, our Friday nights in the Gauntlet have always been, I've always kind of perceived them as, how do we challenge the notion of what it means for a group of people to get together on a weekly basis and play role-playing games, right? So in 2013, it was all one-shots. We did Friday one-shots. And the idea was we're going to meet every week and we're going to play a new game, right? And that's kind of ahead of its time. But not ahead of its time, but it's something that most role-playing game groups don't do, right? They play the same system over and over again.
Right.
We were going to burn through a bunch of games. We're going to try things out. And so that's, and we kept the one-shots going, but just not on Fridays in 2014. In 2014, we did the anthology series, which was we're going to play one fantasy campaign world, but we're going to use a bunch of different systems to play in the same world and see how that goes, right? So for 2015, I've come up with Mandatory Fun Club, but the reason why it's giving me life is because I'm having a lot of fun thinking about what these events are going to entail and how we can make them kind of unique and different. I'm always trying to give the Gauntlet just crazy new different ideas. Sometimes I think I reserve myself a little bit. I think I maybe even go crazier, but I'm having a lot of fun just thinking about it, just trying to thinking about I'm thinking about what does it mean for all us to get together and game? How do we mess with this notion a little bit? How do we change it up a little bit? And that just gives me life, just the process of thinking about the future. It is filled with hope and possibility. That's a phrase I like to airdrop into a lot of my games, as a joke, as an in-joke, which is this notion of hope and possibility. You know, things smell like hope and possibility, or they taste like hope and possibility. This feels like hope and possibility for the Gauntlet, and I love it. Some of the events planned so far are, we are going to get together one night and we're going to watch a movie. And then after we're done watching that movie, we're going to make a real fast Powered by the Apocalypse game inspired by that movie, right? For another one, we are going to get together and we're going to make dirty Dungeon World monsters. When I say dirty, I mean not safe for work Dungeon World monsters. We're going to do that one night. So I'm having fun just thinking about these cool things we can do. There's a game called Sea Dracula. It's a freeform game where normally it's about animal lawyers. And you are animal lawyers, and the way you win your cases is by having dance-offs with the other animal lawyers. And so, but I want to do it instead where, instead of the dance-off, we play this video game called Johann Sebastian Joust, which is kind of a physical activity game, where you have, you're not paying attention to a TV screen. You have like a controller and you have to like move really slowly to this music, and whoever like shakes their controller, like if you cause the other person to shake their controller too much, they're out or whatever. So I'm thinking of things like that, and just the process of coming up with these things is really great. I have not really like shared the brainstorming with anyone in the Gauntlet. Like I feel like maybe I could, but I have not, because I'm enjoying just doing it all myself. But if anyone has any ideas for things we could do for Mandatory Fun Club, you should probably write in. I'll give you the email address at the end of the show. That's what's giving me life. Our upcoming stuff.
So the movie you mentioned, where post movie you do a little game, yeah. Yeah, you've kept the movie top secret. Does anybody else know
it's a list of movies that will be revealed on the night.
Okay.
And we will either choose or we'll roll or something. We'll figure it out. But I have not actually come up with a list yet, though. I've got some ideas. The movies I'm thinking of are, I want to pick movies where there's not already like a natural PBTA game out there, right? Like a movie that has like types of characters that aren't covered by a PBTA hack already. So, that's kind of my thinking on that. And that's what's giving me life. Let's take a quick break and we'll go to the next segment. So our main topic for today, I'm calling Old Yellers. These are mechanical conventions in role-playing games that need to be taken out back and shot. So, just to put a fine point on that, so people know what I'm talking about.
Very cheery name.
Well, I'm inspired by our Cheat Your Own Adventure, where I've been a miasma of sadness. I've only got. I've got a couple on my list here that I've been thinking about. Only one of them, though, do I feel super strongly about, and the other one's not even really an old yeller. It's more of just like a plea to the game design community. The one I feel really strongly about is the idea of initiative and turn order in role-playing games. Anyone who's gamed with me for any length of time, I will eventually bring this up. Right?
Yes.
This comes up at some point, because I hate it. Like,
if by eventually you mean the first time we ever play with you.
Yeah. So I really, really don't like it when I play a game that has initiative, where you have to determine, like, you have to roll initiative, or you have some method of doing initiative, and then that sets up the turn order, which you have to take note of, and everyone has to follow it. I just hate that so much. The reason why I don't like it, the biggest reason why I don't like it is why I don't like lots of different, when I don't like anything, it's because it adds nothing to the fiction, it adds nothing to the fun, most likely. It just totally yanks you out of the experience. So, the classic example here is like, I come from second ed, and second ed, you spend a bunch of time rolling initiative and you figure out, who's going when. Lots and lots of traditional role-playing games do initiative. It is a thing. It's kind of a heresy, really, to like say that you're not into it. Like, I've had a lot of people get really, really like vocally object to me on this, right? I will defend initiative. I'll play devil's advocate for initiative in this slim case, which is, well, so there's some games that are more tactical in nature, like fourth ed, which I have to imagine needs something like that, right?
Right.
And
you're going to be keeping track of so many other things that
right, yeah.
It's not like keeping track of initiative is really detracting.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
It's just one more thing.
Right.
Yeah. I could see where in games that are highly, highly tactical, like that, maybe you do need initiative. And that makes sense because initiative is kind of a holdover from like the old chainmail days, right? Or like, the origins of the hobby, right?
Yeah, it really matters when, whether or not you can go first.
You're right. Yeah, exactly. So to defend it though, there's that, but there's also, I can see the case where in a game where you have to have like hard mechanical differentiators between character classes or between different character types, I could see having like an ability to be like fast and nimble and act first in the combat. That's a way of differentiating your character. So it has some value there. I totally get it. Now, having said all that, it totally yanks you out of the experience. You have to stop and you have to address it. If you're in a group that's bigger than a tiny handful of people, it's interminable. I mean, like, the process of rolling initiative lasts forever, especially if you've got a GM who wants to roll initiative for all of his goddamn monsters.
Right.
Oh, boy. Like, that is bad, right? It is just not, it sucks. And here's the thing. The reason why it's an old Yeller, I really truly believe that you can ditch it in most games. I really do. I think most games, the 4th ed, tactical type games aside, I think most role-playing games that currently have some method of determining turn order, I think you can ditch it. Almost every game works if you handle the turn order kind of cinematically, right? So Dungeon World's very good at this, right? And Dungeon World was really what kind of inspired me to think this way, although it had been kind of lurking in the back of my mind, I think, but Dungeon World really put a nice bright line on it for me. You can have a turn order that's just very cinematic. Like, if in the narration that you're engaging in, if it makes sense for your guy to go next, right? Because he's the one who's rushed up, with his sword a-swinging, let him go first, right? Because he's clearly, like, taken the initiative to do that, right?
Right.
If your wizard is casting a spell, maybe he doesn't go first because that takes a little bit of time. You handle it very cinematically and it works fine. There's some games like Marvel Heroic that still have initiative. It like inexplicably has like an initiative process but it's an initiative process that practically acknowledges that it doesn't mean anything.
Well, I thought Marvel Heroic had a good system, right?
Well, it's good as far as initiative goes, but it's good because it basically tacitly acknowledges that it doesn't mean shit.
Well, it's just whoever just went picks who goes next.
Picks who goes next, right, yeah. And so you can handle it cinematically. You can also handle it, Marvel Heroic could totally handle it this way, and any role-playing game can support it. You can handle it, let's just go around the table. Like, who cares about determining the player order? Let's just go around the table board game style, and you just tell me what your guy's doing, right? That's gotta be faster. It is faster. And I think that it's time. I just think it's time to send initiative and turn order packing. If someone is designing a game, and you're thinking like you need to include that because games have traditionally included that, boy, you need to think again, because as soon as it gets in my hand, in the driveway of my house, we will spend about 30 minutes with me bitching about the initiative in your game. Like, that's just the way it is. I don't dig it. Obviously, in games where the GM's monsters go, like they have a turn, okay, maybe it's going to seem a little unfair if he just drops his monsters in whenever, but I feel like a good GM can balance that, right? Like a good GM, if they're being a fan of the players, they're going to figure that out and they're not going to make it seem unfair. I just think there's ways to handle it, particularly if a game designer is sitting down to make a game. Don't do it. Like, please don't include the turn order process in your game. It's just not necessary. So those are my thoughts on initiative. That's my salvo, as it were, my opening salvo for initiative. Do you guys have anything to add, or
I was just going to
disagree or anything? Yeah.
I'm not, quite as vehement, but all I was going to bring up is what you more or less brought up at the end, is that in something like Dungeon World, going first is both a benefit, and then you get to act first, and also, when you go, the danger is inherent in that because the GM doesn't have a now I go turn.
Right.
True. Yeah. It's all player facing. Yeah. I think not having initiative or turn order in a game would force a GM to think more cinematically, right? And that can only be good, right? It can only be good if the GM is sitting there thinking about the on-screen action in a cinematic way, right?
Yeah.
Like what would be happening on screen right now if I were the director of this movie?
Well, let me take a look at the board behind me where we have written our initiative.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. See, that's not right? Like that's doing nothing for the on-screen action. So, I've even played a couple of like really, like games that are ostensibly like, not story games, maybe like early proto story games or whatever, where they still had initiative, like, and it was just completely vestigial. It's like, oh, here's just a thing that's left over from wargaming and we have to do it because we've always done it. Just get rid of it. I'm not normally one of these guys who's like, oh, let's house rule this game or let's fix this broken game. I'm not really into that. I'm actually pretty, usually like very, kind of a rules as written guy, setting aside my Friday fun time where I do crazy things with games. But in general, like, I believe you should follow a game's rules as they're written. But in this case, I think GM should look at the game they've been running for years and say, hey, I'm gonna try doing this without initiative. I'm just gonna kind of handle it in a more organic way, in a more cinematic way, and see if that improves the flow at the table. And I think you'll find, that it does. So.
Yeah, I've played very few games where I think that would not be the case.
Yeah. So anyway, initiative, turn order, GTFO.
Sounds good. Let's take it out to the shed.
Take it out to the shed. So, Dan, you want to share one of yours?
I think my big one, and this has been a pet peeve of mine for a while, is I really hate random character death. So, or any like mechanically enforced character death.
Okay.
So
this is super controversial, by the way. What you're saying in terms of, well, as much as a role-playing game thing can be controversial, what you're saying right now, it maybe hasn't sunk in with some people yet, but what you're saying right now is incredibly out there, right? So just, that's good though.
Is it?
Oh,
I don't know.
I think it is.
Okay.
I agree with you, but I totally think it is.
All right. Let's like break this down into why this sucks. Okay. Number one, you've got just the practical part of sitting at a table playing with people. Your character's dead. So now what do? Do you sit there and watch? Do you get a new character who's airdropped in? Like, what do you do? Because you're not just going to sit there and watch everybody else play. And so there's always weird fiction breaking things happen when a character dies. Even in traditional, like, very simulationist game.
Right.
It never made more sense to me that if we're leaving in character death because it's realistic,
right,
it's not realistic that a new character is going to be in the next room waiting to join the party.
Right. Unless Sean Bean was the original character that died in the movie. Right?
That's true.
Right.
Yeah. But so if you're going for realism, like from a story standpoint, character death doesn't really make a lot of sense. Random character death. And I would say that I think character death can be cool and it can be great. And a lot of stories, like if you look at other types of media, you know, in movies and books, characters die all the time, but they die in meaningful ways for the most part. It's very rarely just random character death.
Right, yeah.
And so, in a lot of ways, like, especially if we're looking at something like story games, you know, we are telling the same sorts of stories that these other forms of storytelling are doing. Like,
or at least attempting to.
Yeah, exactly. And so, the idea that because this hobby comes from, like, wargaming past, we have to have this one strange nod to realism where there's this weird chance that all of a sudden your character's going to die.
And not on screen anymore.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I don't know. It just seems to me like it always rubs me wrong when I read something about like, and then this is how you roll to see if your character's going to die. And it seems like, you know, we've taken that random chance. We've like given control of the story in so many ways. We're trusting the players with control of the story, except that when it comes to character death, this is like one thing.
We're taking away from them.
Right, where the dice just determine everything.
This is one of the ones where I agree with you in large part, except with a lot of these, there's an asterisk. And that is that I agree with you, except where the game incorporates that into its, you know, fundamental essence. Like, give
an example. What do you mean?
The funnel game is what's.
Oh, sure.
Funnel.
Oh, sure. Right.
Funnel or like Dungeon Crawl Classics and all that stuff.
Or the Final Girl.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
Well, actually, the Final Girl is no. I mean, a bit of that is more or less random, I guess. But with something like the Funnel World, you go in knowing, okay, characters are going to die.
Just to clarify, so listeners know.
Oh, yeah.
You're talking about like, there's a class of, so Dungeon Crawl Classics popularized this thing where you start with a bundle of 0-level characters, like maybe 20 or 30 of them, right, among all the players. They go down into a dungeon, the quote-unquote funnel, and then 95% of them die. The few that are left at the end, they become first-level adventurers. That idea.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
And like, when the players go in knowing this is not even a risk, almost a guarantee,
right?
Then I don't have a problem.
That's different.
Sure,
yeah, for sure.
I mean, there's other games built around that mechanic too, right? Like Goblin Quest or something,
which got turned into Sean Bean Quest.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
Right, yeah. There are obviously like games where you like Steve said, like death is a fundamental part of the mechanical experience, right? Yeah. In the case of Final Girl, you're not even really attached. You're not attached to a single character, so the death it doesn't have as much meaning. And in Goblin Quest, the
game runs until if the game is designed to run until X number of players have died, then
right. And the game literally doesn't end until there is a Final Girl, right? It sounds like what you're talking about, Dan, is the game where there's a little bit more like investment in your individual character,
right?
Like you put a little bit more of your resources in terms of your time and your energy into playing this character, but then like because they rolled a couple of bad die rolls or they had a bad draw of something, they lose all their hit points and bam, they're dead.
Exactly.
Right?
And I would even say like something like Dungeon World where, you know, you have your last breath move, right? So if your character has mechanically died, then you get one more roll to see if there's a possibility they come back. And the interesting one is when you roll a so-so result, right? So you come back with like a new condition, like something you have to do.
Yeah.
That's the interesting one.
Right.
Why is it random whether you can do that or not?
That's true. Well, to be fair, some of the playbooks have mechanized that in where like you have more control over that.
To an extent, but you're still just getting like a bonus to your roll or something, right?
In general, no, your character, like it's a random chance whether your character comes back. No, yeah, I think I agree with you. I think mine has an asterisk as well, similar to Steve's asterisk. Also, I'm going to play devil's advocate. I don't know if I believe this myself, but I'm going to play devil's advocate because this is something that people say. And so I will represent those people. Which is, what about the game where, and this is particularly in a lot of trad games, what about the circumstance where the potential of character death, that hard mechanically enforced character death, is your incentive to play well or to make good decisions, right? Like, it's your incentive to try to live, right? It's your incentive to try, so what are your thoughts about that? Like,
well, so I think that if you actually need that carrot to play well.
True.
Then, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Like, you should be playing well because you like what you're doing.
Right.
And you want to play well.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have like a stick.
A
carrot.
Right, yeah.
You shouldn't need the carrot and the stick to play games well. Like, if you're in this hobby and you're playing games, you should endeavor to play them well. And having like the threat of your character's going to get yanked out from under you and you're going to have to make a new one or sit there and watch for a while.
Like a punishment.
Right.
Almost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was in an Aberrant game, and Aberrant is storyteller system, not World of Darkness, but White Wolf. Supers, which means they take a complicated system and make it way more complicated, because they have to cover world and universe affecting characters.
All supers are bad games, generally. for that very reason, because you have to have that wild variability.
It's the only one I've played, but I cannot dispute it.
Yeah. The variability in power levels is what ruins supers games, right? Always.
But the ridiculous power level, super complicated. And there was a PC death, which was inevitably unsatisfying, due to its being very much involuntary in the middle of a session. And I think by the end of the session, like 3 hours later, maybe she had a good idea of the new character she wanted to play. But that's 3 hours she's not in the game. And it's 3 hours she's not paying attention to the game.
Right.
And it's, we have to shoehorn somebody's cousin, or it wasn't that bad. Shoehorn in a totally new character into the group.
Right. Or you do the like, well, now my twin brother is here who has the same character sheet.
Yeah. Oh, so what about this, Dan? What about this as a solution? What if when your character dies, let's say you have I don't know if it's a house rule or whatever, but what if the GM says, okay, your character has died, or they're going to die. They have earned death.
Yes.
You have until the end of the session to narrate your death on screen. You get to continue playing in the session, and then you get to narrate how you finally go out. What are your thoughts on that?
I would be much happier with that.
Okay.
So. That's sort of the Dread way of things. Because if the
Warren, the Warren has kind of like a controlled death thing.
Right.
Like
that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I mean, so, I always feel like I have to go defend Dungeon World. I don't, but, because Dungeon World does a lot of stuff very poorly, but, on measure, it's great. But, we don't have character death very often, although in Grimworld we just did.
Right, I did like it how at the top of the program.
In Grimworld we did have a bunch of people die, but it's really cool.
Dan hates is awesome.
Right,
It's really cool in Grimworld though, because in Grimworld you have those awesome death moves, and like those death moves carried us through the rest of the session, right? Like it was pretty clear everyone was dying like 2 hours in, and we had another hour and a half to go or so, and so the death moves, like just figuring them out, describing it, and all that stuff was part of the fun. But even Dungeon World, I've never had that many characters die because I'm a punitive GM, but not in a way that like kills players. It's more about like you lose your stuff or your your fictional circumstances are really shitty now or whatever, right?
Which I think to me is just as good a motivation, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Then you have to play with this handicap, right?
But even when we do have a character die, I always try to make it like a special thing. Like I always try to have it be this like momentous, almost like funereal process, right? So I've always tried to make it I've always tried to like lessen the sting a little bit,
Right,
and,
sure.
I don't know if I'm not saying that justifies like having random character death, but it is a thing. It is a response, right? Anyway, yeah. Steve, which one do you want to talk about?
So my first Old Yeller is extensive NPC stats.
Okay.
I say extensive just because even Apocalypse World has the harm they do and the armor they have.
Sure, yeah.
So this is actually, let me go back to the Aberrant game I was in. So I wasn't running that, thank Christ, because we were all, ridiculously superpowered. And of course we need foes and allies and, pawns and chess pieces that are equally ridiculously superpowered. That meant, on top of it being the storyteller system, that everything is super complex.
Statted out to hell.
Yeah. And so even the storyteller, who was really familiar with storyteller system in general and Aberrant in specific, he's been, playing this for years and years. He would still farm out creation of NPC supers and offer XP to the players who would be like, I'm not in this scene, so okay, I'll take 15 minutes to...
Oh boy.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. God. Oh boy. Jeez.
And so...
Would you like extra credit?
And
I know you missed last week's quiz, but you can do this NPC for me and get credit for it.
That, maybe not those exact words, but yeah, that happens.
That's basically it,
You missed a session, which means you missed some XP. Yeah. Here you go, make some...
Here's your extra credit.
They got a super team you guys are going to fight or something.
Yeah, that's amazing. Wow.
Yeah. And so they add something they add basically a lot of complication without, in my opinion, a lot of gain. So my fiction was not significantly enhanced in the Aberrant game because those characters required a two-sided sheet. Very cramped and filled out and full.
So knowing the enemy's maximum lifting capacity really affected you.
Did not come out in play necessarily, right? Yeah.
And
I do like the idea of somebody being like, excuse me, GM, but I'm pretty sure that villain can only lift 500 tons and a skyscraper is clearly 600 tons. Yeah, I love the idea of that, but yeah.
that was basically the power level we were on. So not a ridiculous situation.
Yeah.
But it just, okay. So it's time in game because it's additional, in order to reference the sheet, it takes more time.
Right.
It's also time away from the GM if he or she chooses to invest in that. And it's time away from the players paying attention to the game if you choose to go the route I saw, which is you farm NPC creation out. It's a lot of work for very little gain.
And payoff is not there.
Yeah, the ratio is off. Yeah. Not a fan. And I just think that Apocalypse World, showed me the way. It enlightened me.
Okay, so, I think I agree. Yeah, I totally agree. Of the three of us, I probably run the closest thing to a trad game, which is Dungeon World. Which is, I'm sorry. I'm feeling in a very devil's advocate mode right now. I don't know why that is. I think it's because I don't have as many things on my list as you guys do. I'm not nearly as embittered about role-playing games as both of you are.
Yeah, certainly not you.
Yeah. So, no, here's the thing. Even in Dungeon World has you have monster stats and stuff, but it's a pretty light touch, right? It's a pretty light touch. It's just the basics, right?
Oh yeah.
The hit points and there are 3 or 4 moves they do.
And
that's it.
And the moves are very flavorful.
Exactly. They're not mechanical things. They're just you make the move, poison them or you make the move gnaw off a limb or whatever, right? So, no, I think there's a balance there. What you're saying is the idea of complex NPC stats are the old Yeller.
The Apocalypse World family deals, so much in fiction that basically the stats are fiction typically.
Indeed, yeah.
Aside from, maybe it's got 5 numbers.
Right.
And then after that, it's fiction. That's not really what I'm objecting to. It's you have to have a very specific knowledge set in order to interpret the massive numbers on the sheet in front of you.
Right.
And that is 1 out of, 30 NPCs you have.
Right. Yeah.
That just makes me want to, will never ever play your game.
Yeah. So, just while we're talking about NPC stats, the game that does NPC stats in a way that I love is Dogs in the Vineyard. Dogs in the Vineyard really, really changed my whole outlook on how to prep for a role-playing game, right? Just completely, totally altered my outlook, to where I've incorporated Dogs in the Vineyard, session prep techniques into all of the way I prep GM'd games, right?
The equivalent of town creation?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So I like the, come up with 7 NPCs that each give them a motivation, figure out what their deal is. I do that in all my games, whether it's NPCs or locations or whatever. It's 7 things that the players can run into that I can airdrop in wherever. Mm-hmm. And they have a sort of quote unquote motivation, to sort of, to be an obstacle to the players. But the really cool thing about specifically regarding NPC stats, now this is not something this really only works for Dogs in the Vineyard, but it's cool. You have this blank sheet of it's like a 6-pack of NPCs, right? But they don't have names on them yet. So before the session, you just take a bunch of dice, and it's kind of a dice-heavy game, but you take a bunch of dice and you roll up all your NPC stats, but they're generic, right? So some of them might be better at this, or some are better at that, like some are stronger, some are smarter, or whatever. But you roll them all up in a generic way, and then when the players are about to have an encounter, you just quickly scan it, and you say, oh, this looks like Farmer Bob, right? I'm going to make him this one. And then you write his little name up there, and you have a pre-loaded, ready to go step, because that is a game where it's not NPC stat heavy. It's heavier than what we normally play. It's somewhere in the middle between a traditional game and kind of the games we normally play in terms of NPC stat complexity. But because you do it all beforehand, and you do it all you just have like a bunch of generic stats, like little stat blocks ready to go. You can just airdrop in your NPCs on whichever one makes sense. And it's a nice, it's sort of like a compromise way of it's kind of threading the needle between having NPCs that are fully statted out, but didn't take a bunch of time to do. Right.
It's sort of the preparing to improvise ideal.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
And that even has like a pool where there's you have a certain number of traits that you can throw in at any time during the adventure.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Like you've got like this, in addition to your little 6-pack of NPCs, you've also got like this preset pool of die sizes that if you just need to buff an NPC real fast because it would be interesting to have that NPC be a little stronger right now or to fuck with the players a little bit, you can kind of just cross those off and give them to any NPC, right?
Okay.
So it's a good way. It's a nice, interesting way of, acknowledging sort of this idea of preparing a bunch of NPCs, but while minimizing the work. And that's pretty cool. I like it a lot.
Great. So what's next?
So, so the only other thing I have is not even really an old yeller at all, because I don't actually think this is something you can get rid of completely. It's an old yeller from if I were designing a game, I would consider not having this thing in my game. A little bit like Initiative, right? Like more of a pre-thing, like think about your game design and whether you think you should have this thing or not, right? But this one I'm more flexible on, right? Initiative and turn order, that's just outright. If you can't figure out a way to make the absence of that work in your game, just try harder again, please. It's not needed. Yeah. So my other thing that I was thinking of is just the general idea of having a GM in a game, right? Now,
you said that mine was controversial.
Well, I know. Well, so yours covered approximately 99.9% of role-playing games, right? Mine covers a slightly smaller number. Okay, here's the deal. I actually don't think this is totally necessary. I run lots of games that have GMs. We play lots of games that have GMs. They work just fine, especially if you have a skilled GM or a GM who's capable of working with the players to create, good collaborative story. It's no big deal, right? But I think it's worth considering whether your game needs a GM or not. I just think that's really, really worth considering. And here's why. We do play a lot of games that don't have GMs, and they have, either everyone takes turns framing scenes, being kind of like a temporary GM, or they are games that have a rotating GM or something like that. Yeah. But the point being that there's not one person in charge of creating the fun and the story, right? There's not one person from which it all flows, right? It is a collaborative process. It's a group process. Obviously the real easy examples are Fiasco and that sort of thing, right? There's also a game called Cosmic Patrol, which, I've played once and I quite enjoyed. It has a rotating GM structure where, you're telling this sort of camp 50s sci-fi story, but every round, another player narrates the action, right? They pick up the story and they act as a GM for that round.
And that's basically what we did with that Lasers and Feelings.
Well, so yeah, that's what I was going to move into next. Totally contravening my earlier statement about not house ruling games. We have actually house ruled a few games where we take the GM element out, and it works pretty well, for certain types of games. Lasers and Feelings is a John Harper game, which is, kind of similar to Cosmic Patrol. You have, it's a very camp, 1950s sci-fi style story. It's supposed to have one GM, right? But we played it a couple times this way. We play it to where basically everyone makes a character and we rotate the GMs. Every round, after every scene, the next person becomes a GM. Their character is back in engineering working on whatever, right? Their character's temporarily off screen. It works great.
I was really happy with it.
Yeah, having a GM adds nothing literally to that game, right? And I think John Harper's awesome. He's one of my favorite designers, but that was kind of low-hanging fruit. I feel like you could have pretty easily said, hey, do we need a GM here? Probably not. Let's cut it out.
Yeah. Well, so I would say that I think it's easier in a case like Lasers and Feelings where it's sort of tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah.
And the game is simple, right?
And so it's simple, but also you're not really that concerned about maintaining a consistent tone or anything like that. Because I think that's something that a GM can bring to a game is if you have one person that's kind of in charge of the story from start to finish, then they're setting the tone.
And that's why I think you can't dismiss GMs. You can't get rid of GMs completely. I don't think we'll ever be in a situation where you can't have a GM. There's always there's a place for that, right? I agree. I do think it does help for the game to be simpler as well.
Oh yeah, sure.
Because if you're going to have rotating GMs or no GMs, it has to be something that like not everyone has to have read the rules beforehand, right? It needs to be something
or come with their pre-statted NPCs.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So I think having a simpler game helps. Another game where we've ditched the GM concept is another John Harper game actually called Ghost Lines. Ghost Lines is a PBTA game where you play sort of like steampunk Ghostbuster characters. We played it a few times. It's a good, really easy game to get to the table. Really great. We play it without a set GM. We rotate the GMs every scene. And it's kind of episodic in nature, so it works really well because essentially every little episode is a handful of scenes, and it's like from one train destination to another. Your character's on these trains fighting ghosts, right? And so you go from one station to the next station, and then that's like a little episode, and then you have a little interim thing you do, and then you go to the next thing. So it's easy at that point to switch the GMs and say, okay, well now you're in charge of this part, right? You get to GM this line and do
different director for the episode.
Yeah, exactly. Do your ghost. Exactly right. You do your ghost and hopefully you're not the Chris Carter director, because those were always the shittiest X-Files episodes. Just put Chris Carter on blast. The better ones were always everybody else. No, so I don't think you can get rid of GMs. I'm not saying the idea of games with GMs is an old yeller. It's kind of going against the topic here a bit, but I do wish that game designers would consider it. Like, look at your game and say, is having a GM serving a purpose right now? If it's not, can we open it up to where it's a more collaborative thing? Can this work in my game? I guess going back to initiative as well, I think I'm just really fundamentally against things that feel, oh, it's in here because it's always been here. Right? Like we have this thing because we've always had it, right? And I know, I'm not saying that like game designers are that thoughtless, but I think, I don't think anybody should be beholden to like the past. No one should feel like I've got to do this thing because this is what people expect, right? And so anyway, those were my two. I've said my piece about old yellers. I'm anxious to hear what your next one is, Dan.
All right. So my next one, since the last one was apparently controversial, I'll do an easy one this time. I think skill checks are stupid.
Okay. I'm not sure I agree, but I'm not sure I agree, but go ahead.
Skill checks, just in general, any sort of check like, can I open this door? Can I pick this lock? Things like that. I don't think that's fun. I don't think that's ever been fun. I don't think anyone has ever had fun doing that. So I'm just throwing it out there.
I disagree, but continue.
Okay.
Well, actually, don't continue. Shut up for a second. No.
Just shut up forever, Dan.
So are you railing against all skill checks, or just things that you called out that aren't terribly
that don't
dramatic?
Sound very exciting, right?
Well, so give me a good skill check.
I can give you that exact example, but as a good version, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the situation where you're picking the lock, right?
Right.
On its face, that's not very exciting. Oh, okay, because they've got to be able to get in there eventually, and even if it means the fighter breaking the damn door down or whatever, right? Not that exciting on the surface, but what if there is a group of bad guys like rushing down the hall, and whether you can like break the code of this door or pick this lock in time depends on whether you have to deal with them or engage with them. That's a lot more interesting.
Right. And so I would say that if the more interesting result is you can't, and you have to make that decision of, do I sit here and get the thing out of the chest, or do I leave before these guys get here? If that's what's exciting, if you can't do it in time,
right,
then just make that what happens.
Well, I don't know. I mean, in general, I agree with the spirit of what you're saying, obviously, but I don't know. I mean, because I can imagine a situation where there might be really legitimate reasons why they don't want to engage those guys, right?
And it's also possible to have two very interesting
outcomes.
But opposite
outcomes, right? Yeah, like a potential, I don't think are you saying we should like put possible outcomes on a scale and say, well, this is the more interesting one to me?
So let me back up. Let me back up and say like where this is coming from, okay? Because this is coming.
Yeah, you got to build this foundation more.
So this is coming specifically from Tech Noir,
okay.
Right? And so in the game of Tech Noir, you do not have skills that you can use for things like that. So all of those things, like, can I open this door? Things like that are all just the GM makes that call. The character can say, I'm going to pick this lock. And the GM either says, okay, great, you picked the lock, or he says, you didn't pick the lock.
Right.
There's no rolling for that because in general, like, the philosophy in that game is that that's not fun. Like, the fun is when you're kind of colliding with other things, other NPCs, other characters. That's the fun part.
We talked about this in episode 0 for anybody listening. Like, episode 0, we do a great breakdown of Tech Noir, but I don't think we really talked about this aspect of it. So Tech Noir, honestly, like, Tech Noir blew my mind in so many ways. Okay, sure, yeah.
But this is one that I don't think we really got into, where the way that it's explained is things like, exactly kind of what you were saying. They're trying to pick this lock to get in this door. The way that it's explained in the book is that if you're the GM and they're trying to get in a door, if they're trying to get in a door to get away from things, then they're not going to. If they're trying to avoid trouble, avoid story by getting in a door, you're not going to let them.
Right.
If they're trying to open a door that leads into trouble, then they can probably do it. So you're sort of like funneling them to the interesting things in the story.
Right.
And like, you're not letting the players sidestep the interesting parts.
Right.
By rolling well and hiding or something like that,
What if you have 2 interesting outcomes? Don't you have to have a way of solving it?
So give me an example.
So I can either be caught by these guys and engage them, or I can get into the room in time to save the person who's dying of a diabetic seizure. I don't know. Like, you see what I'm saying? Like,
the wait was worth it on that one.
Those are both very different. Those are both interesting things, right? Like, we've got to get in here to save this guy's life. If not, they're going to die. Or we're going to have to, like, engage these people who are chasing us down the hall, right? Like, you see what I'm saying? Like,
I'm not seeing how those are. I'm not following on that example.
Maybe it's not a great example, but like, help me out, Steve. I don't know. What is the example here?
I wasn't going to go, diabetic side effects, but I was pretty much.
I couldn't think of anything. Sorry. I couldn't think, but
you're trying to escape the guards on the outside. If you get captured, you'll be taken to somebody who wants you dead.
Right. Sure.
Or you're trying to get inside, and inside is essentially something else that wants you dead. Except maybe you could talk them into, seeing things your way or whatever. I don't know. I'm not coming up with anything more specific than you.
I'm not letting this one get away, right? I'm not letting this one get away. So, like,
all right. Attempt number 3.
I didn't help.
Okay.
Take
3. All right. 2 interesting options, right? Unbeknownst to us, the person waiting on the other side of the door is an assassin, and they're gonna kill me if we get in there, like, or they're gonna attack us or whatever, right? Or the security forces that are chasing us down the hall. So how do you decide which one to do in that case?
Because you've been running this game and you know what the most interesting option
so you just make a
be.
decision.
Yeah.
As a GM. Okay, all right. Well,
you're
that's
steering it toward the most dramatic.
Well, so that's fair in Tech Noir, but now let's pull it back from games that aren't Tech Noir, right? In games, what about
which is most games?
Is most games, as it turns out.
And so this is why I brought it up, because I think it does work like exceptionally well in something like Tech Noir, but I was interested to see what you guys thought about it in
okay, so that's fair, because we presented like options as like ways you could like finagle a game to fix our old yellers. Okay, so what you're proposing is, so the situation, the classic trad game where we're trying to break into the room and the orcs are running down the hallway. The more interesting thing is for them to just fight the orcs. So you just say, oh, you're desperately trying to open the door, but you can't, and the orcs are upon you. I just feel like someone's going to feel ripped off at some point. Like, I don't think you can just airdrop that into the house
can't.
Rule.
Well, you probably can't if you have like characters who are built around skill checks, right? Yeah. So, but I would say that characters built around skill checks aren't super interesting because they're the ones who are going to be sitting there rolling to see if you can open a door.
Yeah.
So,
in my gaming career, I've encountered a lot of skill rolls that felt like filler and time wasted.
Yes.
Sure.
But it's possible to, move over those, say, of course you pick the lock because the interesting thing's on the other side, while still having a skill check because you as the GM even are not quite sure how to adjudicate it or whatever. Yeah. Especially if the results of failure or the result of success might depend especially on other player input. So, in other words, like in our example, we know what's going to happen. In the examples we've been giving, we know what's going to happen as a result of one thing or another.
Sure.
But in some games, maybe due to failure, your character does action A, which causes your character over here to do action B.
It's 6 minus an apocalypse.
Something,
right?
yeah. And, the snowball effect or whatever.
Sure.
And interesting things come out of that you couldn't anticipate.
Sure. Yeah. So, okay. So, what about this? Like, what about games like Burning Wheel, which is built entirely around skill checks, right? The whole game is skill checks. Every character has this elaborate list of skills that interact, and you've got to really grok it as a GM to understand how it all works. Very elaborate skill checks.
Right. And I notice you want to play that so often.
Well, okay. So, but hold on. I have played it a lot, though. That's the thing. And
back in the old days.
Well, that's true. Rules as written on the skill checks. When you fail the skill check, this is per the rules of the game. When you fail the skill check, you don't just fail the skill check. This was a very innovative thing that I feel like Burning Wheel did, which was you don't just fail the skill check, like the GM per the rules has to make a twist at that point, right? Like you were supposed to follow up with an immediate twist, like not breaking into the door doesn't mean you just failed to get inside the door. There's a twist. I get to alter the narration of the fiction. I get to add complications to your life. Mouse Guard's the same way. All the games built on it are the same way. Apocalypse World has some of that in its DNA. So what do you think about that?
Well, I'm much happier about that.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's reasonable. That's fair. That makes it more interesting. But I just think that just straight skill checks of can I jump high enough?
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. I agree with you on that. Like, what you're saying, sounds like what you're saying. Your old yeller is skill checks that are just binary outcomes. Yes, I get in, or no, I don't get in. Or just boring. Or just boring.
Right, yeah. Skill checks that are boring.
That are boring.
Which is, I would say, 90% of them.
Right, yeah. Okay. All right, cool. That was fair enough. Good. Fair enough. Good. All right. It's good. No, it's good. Yeah, no, I'm with you I'm about 60% with you on that. Cool.
Give it some time.
Okay, Steve, what do you got?
Okay, my next one is random character generation. So
is this still a thing?
It is.
It is. Oh, it is. Right. Yeah.
This one has an asterisk as well.
World, Dungeon Crawl Classics, all of those. Totally random. Yeah.
So first, why I hate it, because I don't traditionally have the best luck in the world, and being stuck with my inevitably shitty luck on a small series of rolls at the beginning of the game.
Your guy has strength 9, right?
right. For the duration of my character. He's really, really crappy. And of course, in the group, there's going to be that person that has awesome luck. Oh, look at all the 17s I got. Fuck that guy. Fuck that guy. And it's the game that's doing this to me, because if I were able to create my character, as I wanted to, that would be avoided. Speaking of, if I'm going to be playing a game, I'm probably coming in with at least some base idea of what sounds interesting, of what sort of character, even in broad strokes, I would like to play. And what the worst of these, random character generation systems do is they force you to take that cool character idea you have that you're gung-ho about and you're really excited to play, and realize that you can't play it now because, your fighter's got a strength of 2.
Yeah,
and that's not possible, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Hate that so much. And there are a lot of systems that mitigate this to an extent, because the gung-ho Iron Man traditional way of this is, D&D 3d6.
Right.
What you roll is your stats in order.
And that's super old school, though, right? Not new editions of D&D don't even do that, right?
I don't remember.
I don't believe it.
In 4th edition,
I think everybody runs like with the point buy. Now, right?
Once,
even if it's in the rules, I don't think anybody.
Even second edition had ditched that by then. Second edition was doing. I think you rolled all the numbers, but you assigned the numbers to whichever thing you wanted. Yeah.
I'm not familiar enough with OSR stuff to.
Right. Yeah. That is very OSR thing. Sure, super OSR thing, right?
I'm sure there are some OSR games where that give you the option. A lot of games mitigate this either by giving you a point by option, which is fine, or by sort of removing the effect of the randomness.
Okay.
Like you roll 46, you take the best 3.
Right.
And then, or you, I was reading in Call of Cthulhu for an example. Call of Cthulhu, by the way, at least as of 5th edition, which is what I have, or 5.6, whatever.
Right, yeah.
Still no option for point buy.
Wow.
Yeah. They're just like, well, okay, roll all your stats and then add them together and then distribute those points how you like. Right, or in other words, you still have really shitty luck, but you can, at least neatly arrange the cards that say shitty luck on them or whatever.
Right, yeah.
Okay. So, but seriously, my major objection is just that I wanted to play this character and now I can't, and it's your dumbass game system that's forcing that on me.
I don't think I disagree.
My counterexample would be Society of Dreamers. where that is almost purely random.
Oh, sure.
For character generation. It's not the same thing because you're not randomly rolling your stats, but you definitely can't go in with an idea of who your character is going to be.
True.
Because
that is very true.
Your gender, your nationality, your profession is all randomly chosen.
That's true.
So, and I thought that turned out really well.
Yeah. Well, so that's more of like a fictional randomness, though.
Yeah.
It sounds like what Steve was talking about.
This is my asterisk.
A numerical.
Where it's either part of the game, where the game, is you dealing with your character being crappy. Like, I imagine some of the funnel games are
the funnel games, right. Yeah, that was my asterisk. Like, where it's thematically appropriate or genre appropriate, I think it's okay to have, like, random shitty characters, right?
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Or where they use randomness well, like in Society of Dreamers, to contribute interesting ideas to the fiction.
Right.
I've heard of, but can't remember in which context I've heard of, random systems where you're still randomly generating stats, but it's basically you roll a certain amount of dice, and those don't necessarily give you I'm not rolling for my strength. I'm rolling to see, my dude is a fighter, and therefore he has a whatever of 8 and a blah 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 of 6 and a so and so of 4 or whatever. And so usually when systems try to mitigate random character generation, they do it by removing the luck to an extent, and not by making it better.
I totally hear you on that. Yeah, for sure. I don't have anything. I mean, apart from those little asterisk situations, I tend to agree. Yeah, I mean, like you didn't. No one sat down to play a garbage character, especially one that was like, unless they did. Yeah. Unless like it's a story game and you want to play a really conflicted or weak-willed character or whatever. But if you're playing a game where like you have to fight or do anything like that or run and jump, nobody wants to be the lousy one, right? Like that's lame. Yeah. So
that said, I've always been super fascinated by the games where you can die during character creation. I think that's just the best thing. I've never played one, but I'd love to just make a character who dies before I'm done.
That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. What is there besides Traveler?
Traveler's the one I was thinking of, but I think there's a few more.
Okay. You know, I've never played it, but I want to. I want to play. I've never played Pendragon, but I'd like to play Pendragon. Mm-hmm. And I don't know much about it mechanically. I'm sure in general I wouldn't like it mechanically, but I still want to play it or at least check it out because it has that like you play generations of characters. Yeah. So like, okay, I'm playing character X, and then the next session I'm playing character X's son, and so forth, right? And I don't know how it works, but I love the idea in this game. If like you randomly generate the heir, and like they're just like crap, right? Like, like there's one generation where the seed is not strong, right?
Yeah. Your character's jaw doesn't close correctly.
Exactly, right? Yeah, I do want to. I'm sure that's not how it goes, but I would love it if it did. I think that'd be amazing.
That, by the way, is Crusader Kings 2 in a nutshell.
Nice. Well, I don't have any more on my list. What about you guys?
So I have one more. I don't think this one's going to be controversial. So, XP, gaining levels, advancement.
Okay.
I think we can all agree. Let's move on.
Yeah.
Well, just state your case. State your case. If anybody listened to episode 2 of the podcast, we had a really, really good discussion about XP and Powered by the Apocalypse games. I think you should go listen to it. It was the best part of that episode, in my opinion. But anyway, sorry.
So, my one concession to XP is that I think it's okay in a game like Dungeon World or D&D.
Oh, good.
The point is to...
I'm glad we've all come around on this.
Where the point is to... Well, let's just say, I don't think that, it's great, but I accept it as a fact.
I'll take baseline, just acceptance. I'll take that.
That's also how I feel about Dungeon World.
That's what I told my parents. I said, I'll just take your just basic acceptance. That's fine.
So wait, but before you celebrate
That's
too
all
much...
I need from you.
Before you celebrate too much, I still think that it would be better if everybody just got a level at the end of each session.
And you could. You totally could.
That's almost always a better...
Well, and apart from... I know Steve said he had a bad experience once, but like, that's actually how it ends up going too. Like, almost everyone, in the early days especially, almost everyone gets a level the first couple sessions. So first 2 or 3 sessions, everyone levels up at least once. The math just kind of works out that way, but yeah.
But anyway, but apart from games where the whole point is that your dude is getting more awesome, I feel like it's kind of a distraction, and I'm not sure what it's adding.
Are we putting PBTA on blast right now? Are we saying Apocalypse World games need to ditch this? Dungeon World aside.
So yeah, Dungeon World aside, I don't love XP in Monster Hearts.
I don't either. Yeah, if I'm being honest.
I don't feel like it's necessary. I think that you could make a complete whole character in the first session. I don't really feel like my character needs to like get better throughout the course of the game.
Right. What about choosing the advancements though? Like the little extra moves?
Just start me with those.
Okay. All right. Okay. All
See,
right.
but I mean,
I'm not 100%. I'm not totally with you on that. Go ahead, Steve. Sorry. Go ahead.
These are, I think that's like not a great example. I think Apocalypse World might be a better example.
Okay.
But like Monster Hearts, you're teenagers. I would hope you'd fucking get better at shit.
I guess
grow.
that's true.
Yeah.
Except the thing is, though, this is what's always bugged me about Monster Hearts, and I think this is where you're coming from, Dan. The advancements you take, they don't really have any fictional connection to, like, your character getting quote-unquote better, like whatever the hell that means, right? Like it doesn't make any sense sometimes. Like, I've advanced, and so now I get a random gang of people that show up, you know? Like,
exactly.
Like, it doesn't, like, unless you, I mean, like, I'm not sure how, or like, oh, now this one stat goes up by 1. Like, I'm not sure, like, what the direct fictional, the one-to-one fictional connection is between, like, what caused the characters to advance and what they got as a reward.
I don't feel anything missing if my game doesn't have that.
Okay, yeah.
And honestly, in our Monster Hearts game right now, I have an unspent advance. I like put a +1 next to my XP track because I didn't have any idea what I wanted to spend that advance on.
Well, because the story was so good, right?
Right, exactly.
We were enjoying the story as it was. It was just like, oh, who cares? About
right. I don't feel like my character is missing out. Like, I don't feel like there's anything that I need to add to this character to improve the experience of playing this game.
I will devil's advocate for the Apocalypse World games that use experience in this way. And I kind of agree with it too, which is to say, I think the beauty of the Apocalypse World games, this was taken to a whole new level with Dungeon World, but one of the nice things about the Apocalypse World games is they have some of those touchstones, like those RPG touchstones,
right,
that I think people can glom onto, can grok and get into, right?
So you're talking about the old things that people are used to.
I know. I'm probably contradicting myself a little bit, but it's done in a good way, right? Like, I think some of those things were, I think part of the reason why Apocalypse World is so popular, it's easily, apart from, it's very easy to hack, but also, and the core mechanic is really solid, but I think some of those tropey things help. And so in terms of just like expanding the hobby, I kind of see why it's there.
But I'm not talking anything about that. I'm just saying from a purely mechanical standpoint.
No, totally. And I agree with you. I'm pretty sure I agree with you on that point. But for sure.
I'm with you for the most part, but where I am most with you is with simpler games.
Yeah.
Like if we're playing, I don't think Primetime Adventures has any advancement, but if it does, I didn't notice. It's not a thing you'd really miss, right? Because it's about drama. Your character's not, if your character gets better or improves, it's for dramatic reasons.
Right.
Right.
And games like that, I don't miss it. But like, we're looking at an outline of, the things we're going to talk about, audience at home. And a game you bring up that doesn't have advancement is Spirit of the Century.
Right.
And very true. But that's bizarre to me because Spirit of the Century is super fiddly and there's all these stunts and there's, even if you maintain a strict skill pyramid where if you're...
Yeah, it's in Fate, why not go ahead and just throw in character advancement?
Yeah. But like Spirit of the Century is even more so than something like the Dresden Files, stuff that came later. Like it has stunts you can't take until you've taken earlier stunts that you can't take until you've taken earlier stunts.
Right. Sure.
Like you've got things that you can build toward. And it's stuff you're going to be looking at because it's all pretty cool.
I could add another one to my list right there if we're talking about stunts that build on stunts that build on stunts. But what I think that Spirit of the Century does well is that, and correct me if I'm wrong because it's been a really long time since I played it, but at the end of a session, everyone kind of has the option to just erase one of the things they have on their character sheet and replace it with something else.
Maybe. It's been a while too.
It's been
ages
since I played it. I haven't played it in a long time.
It hadn't been too long, but I've only played it once. But that's like a minor milestone, I think, equivalent in Dresden Files. So, maybe it's not every session, but yeah.
Right. But in general, the point is that your characters change, but they don't necessarily, that change isn't necessarily like vertical. They're not necessarily getting better every session, right?
Yeah.
And so if it's appropriate for your character to change at the end of a session, you can totally make that call and your character changes a little bit.
Right.
But if it's appropriate for your character to get better, you can't make that call without sacrificing.
That's a good point. Yeah. That's fair.
But I think that Fate games in general do that in a way I like a lot, which is, we've played 2 sessions, you get a little bit better.
But I think in Spirit of the Century, the idea is that like you start off awesome And so there's not a whole lot of room to get better.
You do start off awesome, but I'm looking at my list of stunts here, and there's very much room.
Well, sure.
There's plenty of room.
Yeah.
Cool. Are there any more old yellers? What else are we taking out back?
All right. My last
possibly
one,
taking out back.
Right.
Yeah.
My last one is fiat target numbers.
Okay. Describe what that means in general.
So to use a specific example, 4th edition D&D, which is the version I'm most familiar with, you'll have skill checks. If you're rolling against another character, an NPC, then the GM will have a number on a sheet, part of a stat block or whatever that you're rolling against. I'm not talking about that. But if you are, say, trying to make a climb roll to ascend a cliff,
right,
then there has to be a target number in this sort of game that you need to hit in order to determine success or failure.
Right.
And that target number is determined by the GM. Typically, these games will have guidelines or whatever, but it's a number that the GM pulls at least out of the vicinity of his or her ass.
Right.
Right.
And I think the most egregious example is, I looked this up recently when I saw that Feng Shui was getting kickstarted for a second edition.
Right.
Or a proper second edition instead of just a reprinted one. And I was like, should I support this? I went and looked at my old files. And so in order to determine, they've got like a chart of example difficulties.
Okay.
Here's how ridiculous that gets.
Okay.
So in Feng Shui, you determine a difficulty that's going to be somewhere between like 5 and 45.
Okay. Yeah.
And where it falls on that spectrum is just like, oh man. I have no words for how bizarre and Byzantine and random the GM's thought process must end up being.
That's a big range. 5 to 45.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
crazy.
I think the examples for 45 is like running along a grain of grass or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
But Robin Laws gives examples for, so in order to lay down on the street low enough that a car passes over you and you don't get run over, right? That is a difficulty 14.
Okay.
In order to lay down on a train track low enough that the train doesn't hit you, that is a 16.
That makes sense to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
That is two harder.
Oh.
I was just thinking, like, on a scale of 5 to 45, that definitely seems like
That seems like it'd be
two
too
scale
hard.
increments harder. Yeah.
So that's an example of one that makes perfect sense. Let me give, oh God, I hate this. Every time I would be rolling against a target number that the GM had to make up in any game I've played, from, White Wolf or a storyteller game to this. This is the sort of thing that tends to come up in more traditional games. Even if I made it, I felt like, it probably should have been harder. And if I didn't, I was like, I just got screwed out of that GM.
Right.
Right.
I really hate it so much. And if the system is low granularity, like if it's a choice between this is easy, or hard,
Right. Yeah.
whatever. There's my asterisk, no problem.
Yeah.
But
The more granular, it starts to feel arbitrary, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
It starts to feel like an arbitrary decision by the GM. Yeah.
If I fail because you picked target number 16 instead of 15, I'm not happy on that. Yeah. And so the GM.
But the funny thing is like Robin Laws, he did Feng Shui, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's a super smart guy, right?
Yeah.
I listen to their podcast.
Yeah, me too.
They're great.
When I hop back in the car, that's what's on.
Yeah, they're great. But I can actually imagine Robin Laws being like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. Clearly that would be a 16.
I feel like if he were here, he could probably explain that to us, and we'd all be like, okay.
And we'd all agree, like, yeah, you're right. Yeah, I get it now. But for sure, no, it does seem a little like wild. Yeah.
And the GM is tasked with considering a huge pool of factors that might potentially affect this roll, right? And it gets reduced to a number. It gets quantified, and it gets thereby made kind of ridiculous.
Right.
And, and if it's just one person, if it's just the GM doing that, then it feels at times punitive and arbitrary.
Right.
And,
that's the biggest problem to me, right? That's what sounds.
Yeah, and that can easily turn into like, I don't want you to go in this direction.
Right.
So, that's really hard now, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
I've felt that palpably emanating from the other end of the table at times.
Yeah.
And if it were, I put it to the table, what should the target number be? And everybody agreed, you're trying to duck under a train now. It should be a 16. Honestly, I'd be much better with that. I'd be like, everybody agrees. Okay.
Yeah.
Bump my head on the train.
Yeah.
I feel sort of the same way with systems, I'm going back to storyteller stuff. I have not played that much storyteller. I don't know why it keeps coming up. But it makes me feel the same way that those systems make me feel when it comes to rewarding XP, or with Exalted, like if your character's doing something in Exalted, you can get more dice to roll.
Right.
Or a bonus, I don't remember which, from doing what they call stunting, and that's basically describing in an interesting way how your character does something.
Yeah.
And the storyteller decides whether to give you a 1, 2, or 3 bonus based on how much he or she likes your description.
Right.
And with XP, doling out XP, it's like, oh, well, you showed up, so you get 1. And then I like the thing you did, so you get a second one. I don't like the thing you did, so you just get the 1. It's just, it feels almost clicky and,
oh man, like the post-game XP bonuses for like, oh, you did the best RP this session.
That might be an old yeller. That might be a bonus old yeller there. A little bit. Yeah. You know where it's really egregious? Sorry, Luke Crane. You know where it's really egregious is Burning Wheel. That's
workhorse. Yeah.
That system of like post-game, like, it's not even fan mail because it's got this really like complex system of who gets to decide what.
It doesn't happen in the moment.
No. It's after the session is over, and it's incredibly complex, like everything in Burning Wheel. There's like multiple categories. Well, who was the MVP? Who was the workhorse? Who did their belief? Who did their instinct? Like, it's just like, it's interminable. Like, it lasts forever. and it's just like, blah.
Well, look, let me make you guys a deal. We cut out skill checks. That erases your issue with target numbers. We cut out XP. That erases our issue with post-play XP awards.
Right.
Problem
solved. Right. Yeah. Let's go make our game.
Let's do it.
Let's go do it. Well, do you have anything else you want to add to any of this conversation?
I don't
Does everyone feel satisfied with how this all went? Cool. Well, let's wrap up then. That was our podcast. I hope everyone enjoyed it. If you would like to reach us, we can be found on Meetup. If you're going to be in Houston, you can find us on Meetup by Googling role-playing games in Houston. We will pop right up. You can come join us for a game. If you are on Google+, just go to the community section of Google+, and search for The Gauntlet. We will come right up. We have an email address, which is gauntletpodcast@gmail.com. And we also have a website where there is nothing, but I'll give it to you anyway, which is, I always forget. What is it?
It's gauntletpodcast.libsyn.com.
.libsyn.com.
We should really just stop giving that out there. There's nothing there.
Because there's nothing there, right? I do like the idea of someone going and checking it every day, though. Just to see if that. So go check it. Tomorrow there might be something. A little Easter egg. A little bonus for you guys. So
there won't be.
So that was it. Thank you so much for joining us, Steve. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
You guys have a great one.
Thank you.